I've already told you about my laziness and the fact that I'm using a sermon that I prepared for the Sunday that we canceled services. This was meant to be a pre-Christmas sermon rather than a post-Christmas sermon. But I want to say that regardless of what I might say, and you'll hear me say ball humbug an awful lot during Christmas time. I get it from my daughter. That I love Christmas time. I find it's a time when the world, even those that are not Christian, we're becoming aware of the fact that God loved the world to give His only begotten Son. I enjoy that. But one thing I don't enjoy, maybe this is why I say ball humbug an awful lot. I don't enjoy preparing sermons at Christmas time. I want you to think of why would that be? Because it's a time of God's love, it's a time of God's grace, it's a demonstration of God's mercy. Why would I detest the idea of sitting down and preparing a sermon for Christmas time? Simply put, we all know the story. We all know the story. What can I say that's new? And that thought was on my mind this past month, especially during the time of December the 1st and December the 8th. I already told you about the young man that came to me in the Kroger's in Proctorville and asked me why Jesus had to be born. I happened to be searching the channels during the daytime one day. I heard a preacher make the statement that the cross of Christ was made out of the same wood that was used in the manger. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. It may have been made out of the same kind of wood, but not necessarily the same wood that the manger was made of. All these thoughts were in my mind. Well, what can I come up with something new? And that comment that was made about the wood of the manger being also the wood of the cross was on my mind. And I got thinking about the number of times in the ministry of Jesus Christ that He used nature as an illustration in His parable. It's the parable of the mustard seed. The parable of the pearl of great price. And how often did He refer to grain, the sower that went out and sowed the grain? And things of this order. And I got thinking about my own life, about the times that I would put out a garden. When I was a kid, my dad would put out a garden. He did so until I went away to college. And when I went away to college, he stopped putting out gardens. I think you might understand the reason why. But when we moved to where we moved now, I cannot put out a garden in the ground that we have. My kids will tell you that I had the worst looking gardens there ever was. Now I know Luke put out a garden this past summer, and he's had 2 or 3 different locations where he has a small plot where he puts out a garden. And I wonder how many of you have ever tried to put out a garden. Now I'm going to tell you my secret in getting stuff out of my garden. I put out a garden and let the weeds take over. Then I see somebody that has a beautiful garden. I say, hey, come look at my garden. And they feel so sorry for me, they'll go pick stuff out of their garden and give it to me. And that's how you get a lot of stuff out of a garden that you don't take care of. And then a thought came to my mind. The Bible mentions gardens. And when the Bible mentions gardens, you can arrange the gardens in the sequence that they occur. And it will tell you the whole story of man's need of a Savior and the Savior and what He did. My sermon title this morning is The Gospel Story of Four Gardens. And I'd like for you to really think about this, especially if you put on a garden or buy any vegetables and so forth. But the first garden that I want you to look at is the Garden of Eden. Boy, I wish I could have been there. I can imagine that the Garden of Eden was absolutely beautiful. God looked at the garden after he was done with creation. He looked at everything he had made, and boy, it was really good. I don't think there was anything more beautiful than the Garden of Eden. I read someplace that before the flood occurred, that the trees were bigger. I believe that because of some of the fossils we have found. The fruit was larger, and I also believe that because of some of the fossils that were found. And more delicious. I wonder whoever knew that. I don't necessarily believe that. But it was beautiful. There was peace and contentment. There was an abundant supply. Everything man would need was right there. It was sinless and pure. It had communion with God. And the only responsibility man had was to care for it. What more could you ask? That it was man did not do as he was told. I've always said that I assume that Eve was tempted and Adam was seduced. I mean, you might think about that for a while. But I want you to think just for a moment, what happened in the Garden of Eden? God told them that they could eat of every tree except one. Except one. And that was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, a lot of people have tried to figure out what that tree was. Some said it was an apple tree. I don't know. I have no idea. I've heard preachers say it had to be the use of sex, but God told men to multiply and to replenish the earth even before they had sinned. I have no idea what that fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil was. But we know that they did. Through their carelessness, through their disobedience, through their wickedness, man fell by eating of the fruit of that tree. And when they ate of the fruit of that tree, sin came into the world. And man's destiny was that of death. Now, I can give you arguments for either death of spiritual death or death of a physical death, or both. I think it was both, in my own opinion. But yet, as you think of it, man became a sinner, separated, and disassociated from God. They lost their communion with God. And as a result, man was condemned to die. And then we have the next garden, the Garden of Gethsemane. I love